Will anyone listen?
Yeah, I don't know. Meanwhile, I'm going to go home tonight and make a lovely pizza. The question is whether to put the cheese on top or on the bottom.
Well, where does the tin spaghetti go?
Yes, and my mother used to make tin spaghetti pizzas.
Yes, that's right.
My father-in-law's rolling in his grave.
A big response to pool covers versus fences. We'll have that next week in the Friday mailbag. Steve McCabe and Jenny Walden, thank you so much for being with me. And a big thank you to Amelia Langford for producing the week. I'm Wallace Chapman. I am back Monday, 3:45. See you then.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E Haere Akine, the Ports of Auckland boss, is accused of making derogatory comments about Māori and Pasifika employees. Cyclone Yasa turns deadly as the storm pounds Fiji. A man who brutally murdered his ex-wife will spend at least 19 years behind bars. Secrecy still surrounds the identity of Grace Mullane's killer. The plug's been pulled on WOMAD, but the lights are still very much on in New Plymouth. A COVID cluster on Sydney's northern beaches is blowing up. The All Blacks captain on whether enough is being done to protect players from head injuries. And a camping holiday might be on your summer wish list, but living in a caravan is an everyday reality for some New Zealanders. Don't forget, you can watch us live.
RNZ News at 5, kia ora ko Susana Leatao tēnei. A woman has appeared in court in Auckland on charges relating to threats targeting graduation ceremonies at the University of Otago. Police allege she was threatening to carry out an attack using guns and explosives of a magnitude surpassing the March 15th attacks in Christchurch. 8 ceremonies were postponed and Otago Polytechnic was forced to do the same for its planned graduation. The woman appeared in the district court this afternoon and has interim name suppression. She was remanded on bail and aspects of the hearing were heavily suppressed. She is due to appear back in court in February. Cyclone Yasa has left 2 people dead as it swept over Fiji's Vanuatu. Details are scant as assessment teams are yet to get to all areas hit by the then Category 5 storm, which gusted up to 345 kilometres an hour. Many thousands of people are sheltering in hundreds of evacuation centres. Yasa has moved to the southeast and has been downgraded to Category 3, but Lucy Banuve, who lives in Lambasa, says buildings are damaged and power lines and trees are down.
Roofs have been blown off, structures have collapsed in, and right now the worry is the flooding because the high tide and when rainwater collected on the mountains come all down also, there's always flooding around these areas. People are just preparing for that while cleaning up. They're also mindful that because rain keeps coming.
Lucy Banuve in Lambasa. Opposition parties are accusing the government of being cynical with its release of a critical report into the COVID testing strategy. The report by an independent committee headed by Heather Simpson and Brian Roche found problems with communication, accountability and clarity in the testing framework. Here's political reporter Charlie Drever.
The final report was received by the COVID-19 Response Minister last month and has been released a week after Parliament finished for the year. National MP Chris Bishop says the report is damning and it is very disappointing the government took until the Friday before Christmas to release it. ACT leader David Seymour says best practice would have been to openly debate the report and seek to do better as a country. Ko Charlie Drever, DNA.
An Auckland man will spend at least 19 years in prison for murdering his ex-wife in a frenzied knife attack last July. Manchao Lee killed Yang Zemin after dragging her from a footpath in the West Auckland suburb of Massey. Nick Trubridge was in the High Court at Auckland for the sentencing.
On the morning he killed his ex-wife, Lee parked a short distance from Miss Yang's house. He then stalked her as she walked to her bus stop before tackling her, dragging her off the footpath and then stabbing her 12 times with a hunting knife. One witness, a construction worker, said he saw Miss Yang's body go limp before Lee left the scene. Justice Chagos referred to a number of aggravating factors before jailing the 65-year-old for life, including that Lee attacked Miss Yang's vital organs. This is Nick Trubridge.
A commission is being appointed to run the troubled Tauranga City Council. It comes after the resignation of the Mayor Tenby Powell last month. The Minister of Local Government, Nanaia Mahuta, says the decision to appoint a commission comes after the council failed to provide sufficient evidence on how it is addressing its issues. Ms Mahuta says commissioners will help to pave the way for the next set of decisions to be made and means a by-election does not have to be held. Motorists are being warned of delays after 2 vehicles crashed on State Highway 1 south of Wellsford. Police say 2 people are seriously injured while 4 others have moderate injuries. And the police are also advising drivers to expect delays on State Highway 1 north of Dunedin after a crash near the turn-off to Moiraki this afternoon. 2 people have been injured. It's 4 minutes past 5. The All Blacks captain Sam Cane worries about his future health after suffering several head knocks, but believes New Zealand rugby is looking after its players. More former players, including former All Black Nemia Tialata, have joined a class action lawsuit against World Rugby. The lawsuit alleges the sport didn't protect them from the risks caused by concussions. Cane believes New Zealand rugby is better than most unions at concussion prevention and treatment.
Because of some of the knocks that I've had, it's always worried, but I can truly speak that I've never ever felt pressured to play through a head knock. I feel like we're very well looked after here in New Zealand particularly. I think even hearing stories from guys in other parts of the world, like New Zealand is leading the way in player welfare.
Sam Cane. Team New Zealand has comfortably won the first of 2 races against Team UK on day 2 of the America's Cup World Series in Auckland. The hosts crossed the finish line more than a minute ahead. The race was the first the British team has completed after they were dogged by mechanical issues yesterday. Earlier today, American Magic had their first loss of the regatta, finishing 12 seconds behind Italy's Luna Rossa. The Black Caps are hoping to continue their winning ways when they play Pakistan in the first T20 Cricket International in Auckland tonight. The first match of the 3-match series is set to start at 7 o'clock. That's the news.
Tomorrow morning, how to gather together in a better, more interesting way this holiday season. Priya Parker has some suggestions. We will recap this year of COVID with Dr. Chris Smith. Director Vincent Ward talks about his latest, typically challenging movie. And James Rebank's mission to de-industrialise farming. I'm Kim Hill. Join me tomorrow morning from 8 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. In the west from Northland to Wellington, mostly fine. Cloudy periods, especially overnight. Coromandel Peninsula and Bay of Plenty, fine spells. However, cloudy morning and night with patchy drizzle. Taumaranui, Taupo and Taihape, mainly fine with isolated showers. Gisborne to Wairarapa, also Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury. Fine with high cloud at times about Marlborough and Canterbury. A few patches of lower cloud about Christchurch and Banks Peninsula. For Bulla, cloudy periods, Westland and Fiordland, light rain, clearing Westland this afternoon, evening, rain becoming persistent and heavier in Fiordland tonight, spreading to Westland tomorrow. Otago and Southland, mostly cloudy, scattered rain clearing for a time tonight. And Chatham Islands, cloudy periods. RNZ National at 7 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. Coming up on Checkpoint, the boss of Auckland's port is accused of making derogatory comments about Māori and Pasifika employees, with the union claiming some workers are so offended they boycotted the job today. We'll have more on this in a moment, but first, police allege a woman charged over cancelled graduation ceremonies in Otago was threatening a large-scale attack. Thousands of students missed out on officially collecting their degrees in the wake of an unspecified but serious threat. Today, a 22-year-old woman appeared in the Auckland District Court. Our reporter Katie Doyle was there.
The charges relate to threats targeting the graduation ceremonies at Otago University. Now, police allege that she was threatening to carry out an attack using guns and explosives, surpassing that of the mosque attacks. And that was an act intending to cause significant disruption to the activities of the New Zealand population. Now, if you remember, 8 graduation ceremonies at the university had to be postponed because of these threats, and Otago Polytechnic was forced to do the same for their planned graduation.
And so what actually happened when this woman appeared in court?
So she appeared in the Auckland District Court this afternoon and she has interim name suppression. She's been remanded on bail, but aspects of the hearing were heavily suppressed and she's due to appear again in February.
And that was reporter Katie Doyle there, who was at the appearance in the Auckland District Court of a 22-year-old woman who's been charged over those cancelled graduation ceremonies. Over the past few weeks, Checkpoint has continued to detail concerns about Auckland's port, which has continued to come under fire for delays unloading freight, while retailers wait on desperately needed stock at one of their busiest times of the year. It's also been fined more than $500,000 over the death of a worker, the second in recent years. Tonight, Checkpoint can reveal the port's boss is being accused of making derogatory comments about Māori and Pasifika employees. The union is claiming some workers are so offended they didn't come to work today. During an interview with Checkpoint last night, Port CEO Tony Gibson admitted the port had some safety culture issues.
We have a large Pacific Island Maori community, and very often they are what I would call shy in coming forward to address issues.
And Mr Gibson's adamant its automation project is not to blame for the major issues the company's facing, including delays in unloading freight. Maritime Union's National Secretary Craig Harrison says workers disagree.
What we've been getting told by our members on the port is they seem to be having a lot of ongoing issues around getting it all to the automation to work properly and the systems to talk each other. So it was just a few weeks ago that they closed the automation down while one of the automated straddles hit a concrete barrier. And you would have thought that so far into the project, this started February 2019 they were arriving, that they would have been a fair way down the track of getting it sorted by now. So we can't see how they're going to roll this out by Christmas. We can't see how they're going to get it rolled out by even March next year unless something drastic is going to change.
So what did you think when you heard the port CEO, Tony Gibson, describe it as, one glitch?
Well, he might have one glitch on the one day, but I think they have glitches every day of the week, just quietly, yeah. The CEO's been there while you've had 2 deaths, and prior to the 2 deaths, there were another 2 cases where ports of Auckland were prosecuted under health and safety. And on top of that, you had the incident where the ocean swimmer was tied up with the pilot boat. So when they talk about taking ownership, I haven't seen any of the management team take ownership of the problem. I haven't seen any of the HR team being disciplined or sacked. So, I have little confidence that they're going to change it. And what was really upsetting a few of our members got was the comments he made last night on the media saying part of the culture was having Pasifika and Māori workers and they were shy not coming forward. And our members and the workers find it quite offensive because they do come forward and they do raise issues. So I don't know why he's done that, but a couple of members were that upset. They rang me this morning and then decided not to go to work, to have the day off.
Why do you think he would say that, the CEO?
Look, you'd have to ask to drill him onto that, but I think it's, and in this day and age, it's not warranted. If you look at our membership, it's diverse. It's Pasifika, Māori, women, young people. And if you look at the Auckland branch of the Maritime Union, if you look at the executive team, which is made up of workers from our industry, it exactly looks what our industry looks like. Young women, young men, Pasifika, Māori, and they all take part and contribute in the debates. And I don't know why he said that.
When you say, Craig, that those kind of comments aren't warranted in this day and age, what do you mean by that?
Well, it seems to me that he seems to think that half the trouble of he's got a health and safety issue is because he's got Māori and Pacific Islanders working at the ports of Auckland. And if no one finds that offensive, right?
Do you think those comments were racist, Craig?
I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't call them. Well, I wouldn't call them racist to the extent like I think it's derogatory. It doesn't give those people the credit for the knowledge they bring to the table and who they are as workers. It's disrespectful.
Do people feel safe there at the ports?
No, they are nervous. For instance, the port had what they called a fatigue risk management policy, and that came about the amount of hours the stevedores were able to work in a 7-day period. And we actually had to take the port company on about that because they were actually breaching their own health and safety policies with workers doing excessive hours. So now they've pulled it back, which is good. So what's been happening, and they knew this prior to COVID, they've been working excessive hours and they've not done anything to sort it out. And when Ross Clark said in February 2019 that they were struggling to get enough staff on board, they had plenty of time to sort this out.
Why do you think they haven't?
You'd have to ask them. I just don't think they've analysed what they needed in the future. And I think they've actually thought that automation was going to be well and truly working by now and they wouldn't need all these employees.
So, does someone need to go down there?
Well, I think so. Like, what do we wait? Do we keep on waiting as it gets worse and worse? Because New Zealand will be heading into its big export season with the produce, and there'll be a vast amount of containers carrying the likes of onions and squash and all that to the markets. And if they can't get those containers repatriated out of Auckland down to other ports or down the country, and they're tied up sitting on ships in Auckland, there's going to be a lot of people really concerned, and it's going to have an impact. And it's starting to impact the country now. I think if you ring up some of the ports around the country and talk to them, for instance, I think Wellington, they're getting impacted on it. How the ships are actually, I think, starting to drop cargo in Sydney and letting other vessels pick them up. But the mere fact that the ships coming into Auckland now are putting a surcharge on the cargo coming into Auckland, everyone's paying for it now. It's only going to get worse unless the company can give us an indication when it's going to be sorted, and they haven't done that.
Who does the buck stop with?
Well, to me, it starts with the chair and the board, and also starts with the CEO and the management team. They've been at the helms of this automation process, and it's gone on for a couple of years. Yes, COVID did have a little impact on it, but I don't think if you look at ports, if you look at Oceania, they say they're the best port in Oceania, and that, really the only other place in Oceania who's got container ports is Australia, and that's who they're comparing themselves. But if you compare them with Australian ports, I don't think the Australian ports have got the backlog and the backup compared to what you're seeing in Auckland. Surely Tauranga's scaled up to their as much as they can in capacity. I don't think Littleton's overrun at the moment. I know Wellington's struggling at the moment just because the effects of the earthquake they had. But
so, given what you know, your best estimation, when do you think automation will be up and running? Will they even get there by the end of next year?
I think you'd have to be optimistic to have made it by the end of the year. I'd say my best guess, the vast majority of next year, they will still be impacted by what's going on now, because when you look at if the ship's 11 days behind and it takes so many days to train up these new people, and and the hours are getting reduced because they haven't got enough staff, it's just going to keep on compounding. And it'd be interesting to see if the company Ports of Auckland does come back and tell the public that there will be a date when this is sorted. And I don't think they'll give it.
And that was Craig Harrison from the Maritime Union. It is 17 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your feedback on that. Let us know if you're still waiting for goods, and also if you work on the port, we would love to hear from you. You can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Now, I've got some traffic news for you. There's been a serious crash on State Highway 1 just south of Wellsford. Two vehicles collided head-on at about 4 p.m. and the road is closed between Wellsford and Warkworth in both directions. 2 people have serious injuries and 4 others have moderate injuries. One of them was airlifted to hospital. There are diversions in place, so expect major delays if you were driving that way this evening. Now, do let us know what it is like on the roads out there, because I know a lot of you will be heading off on your break. Text us on 2101 if it's safe to do so. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. An Auckland man who killed his ex-wife during a frenzied attack will spend at least 19 years in prison. 65-year-old Lee Man Chow murdered Yang Jimin with a hunting knife in the West Auckland suburb of Massey last July. He stalked his victim as she walked to her bus stop before tackling and killing her in broad daylight. Today, Justice Jagos sentenced Mr. Lee to life behind bars. He was also sentenced for breaching a protection order. Our Checkpoint reporter Nick Trubridge was in the Auckland High Court this morning and explains how Lee planned his attack. Now, just a warning, aspects of the case are distressing.
Lee basically collected sort of an arsenal, I suppose you could say, of hunting knives prior to the attack. He also told his flatmates that he was planning on dismembering or killing her. Then in 2018, of course, a year prior to when the attack happened in 2019, he actually told his mental health support person that if he couldn't get redress through the courts because there was a property dispute between the pair, that he would look to get redress simply by harming her. He specifically said by chopping off her hands or cutting off her feet. The morning of her death on July 29 last year, he actually parked up near her house. He filmed her as she came out of her house. He then followed her as she headed to her bus stop on her way to work. He came up behind her. She screamed as he tackled her. He then dragged her off the footpath into sort of a grassy area away from the footpath and, as we know, stabbed her multiple times.
This is an absolutely horrendous case, and from the detail you've just given us, very orchestrated and planned. There were people who were caught up in this, witnesses.
Yeah, so Justice Jagos referred specifically to a group of construction workers. One of the construction workers in particular said he saw the attack and estimated that Ms. Yang was stabbed about 12 times within the space of a minute. Her body then went limp before, as he described it, Lee strutted from the scene. There was another witness, a young boy on his way to school. He actually walked past both Lee and Yang on his way to school while he was walking up the footpath. Once he got further down the road, he heard a scream, and Justice Jago said he was so scared that he kept walking instead of turning around. A number of other witnesses said that they heard screams, and they simply described them as screams of absolute terror.
So there is no question that this was a ferocious attack. What do we know about the injuries that Ms. Yang sustained?
Yeah, so there were 10 stab wounds to sort of the front of her body, including a wound that went straight through her heart. There were also stab wounds that connected with bones like her ribs, obviously creating a lot of damage there. There were stab wounds to her left hand and her left armpit, which were consistent with her trying to defend herself. And Justice Jagos, in going over some of the aggravating features that led to this sentence, commented that Mr. Lee, in his attack, targeted some of her vital organs.
And so what did you hear from the family today, the victim's family?
Yeah, so the impact on them's been pretty serious. Her mother, the victim's mother, for example, now suffers from fairly severe depression, which can get so bad that she is often admitted to hospital because of the symptoms of that, the depression she now suffers from. In terms of the impact on her son, he commented that watching the CCTV was like watching a film or a movie, but at the end of that film, it's his mother that winds up dead. So it's a serious and lasting impact, particularly on her relatives.
Checkpoint reporter Nick Trubridge there. 2 people have died as a result of Cyclone Yasa bearing down on Fiji. People across the country woke today to count their losses following the destruction left behind by the Category 5 storm. More than 20,000 people remain in evacuation centres. As the authorities begin to assess the extent of the devastation, help is pouring in from the international community. Christine Ravoy has more.
Cyclone Yasa has caused widespread flooding and damage to homes and food gardens across the country. Governments, NGOs and aid agencies say they stand ready to help the Fijians in their recovery effort. New Zealand is one of the first to respond, with the High Commission in Suva preparing dignity kits and water cartons for those immediately affected. High Commissioner Jonathan Kerr says New Zealand supports Fiji's relief efforts to the vulnerable communities. Save the Children New Zealand Director Jackie Southey says children are among those vulnerable when disaster strikes.
What happens when we have these disasters is it affects the food chain, and so crops can be uprooted, flooded, damaged, destroyed, with scarcity of drinking water and water for crops. What we do, so we work with the governments here in New Zealand and in the Pacific, such as Fiji, so that when a disaster hits, we're ready to go.
Ms. Southey says every effort must be made to ensure children are not neglected during disasters, even if they are at home or in an evacuation centre.
Families come together to find shelter in the height of these storms, but then in the aftermath, they need child-friendly, safe spaces to be able to play and recover. Because not only are they suffering the physical impacts of such an event happening to them, maybe they've lost all of their possessions, and that can mean all of their food in their house. So we need to make sure that we've got supplies.
Fiji is still reeling from the effects of April's Cyclone Harold, a similar magnitude storm which killed one man, left thousands homeless and millions of dollars in damage. The UN Specific Representative Sanaka Samarasina met with government officials this morning to discuss how the global body can help.
We, of course, have a number of personnel here, almost 600, and pre-positioned supplies in warehouses here and in Brisbane, some of which we intend to bring in already tomorrow.
Mr. Samarasina is accompanying a government delegation to inspect the extent of the damage on Vanuatu, which bore the brunt of the storm.
So everything from getting satellite imagery to data collection, impact assessment, as well as logistics and moving pre-positioned supplies to respond to immediate needs, as well as the work that needs to be done thereafter on needs analysis. With the World Bank, ADB and others, the UN is already not just ready, but operational.
Meanwhile, a former journalist living on Vanuatu says people are wary of the threat of flooding even after Cyclone Yasa has moved from the area. Lucy Banuve, who lives in Lambasa, says power lines and trees are down.
Roofs have been blown off, structures have collapsed in, and right now the worry is the flooding because the high tide and when rainwater collected on the mountains come down also, there's always flooding around these areas. People are just preparing for that while cleaning up. They're also mindful that because rain keeps coming.
Yasa has now moved to the southeast and has been downgraded to a Category 3 storm. But Ms. Banuve says people are still dealing with its impacts. Earlier, Australian High Commissioner John Feeks assured the Fiji government Canberra is ready to assist. Head of Pacific Delegation for the European Union, Sujiro Sim, has echoed similar sentiments. For Checkpoint, ko Kristin Ravoy, Tēnei.
The Ministry of Health has been slated in a long-awaited report which highlights serious shortcomings with New Zealand's testing and border regime. The brutal findings have prompted the government to shake up who's in charge and pump another almost $3 billion into the system. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
It seems a lifetime ago, August 11, that late-night media conference which shattered Kiwis' quiet confidence.
After 102 days, we have our first cases of COVID-19 outside of a managed isolation or quarantine facility in New Zealand.
Amid the mad scramble and Auckland lockdown to follow, came revelations about the Health Ministry's actions, or lack of. It had not been testing border staff as frequently as the public had been assured, prompting fury from all corners. The government called in its heavy hitters, its troubleshooters, Sir Brian Roche and Heather Simpson, to review the regime. Their report out today pulls back the curtain on the disarray behind the scenes.
Would it have been better if all of this had been perfect from the beginning? Of course it would have been, but let's just be real here. This is something that we have never done before. There will be mistakes. What I'm confident in, though, is that, where mistakes are made, they're being identified, they're being fixed.
But there is quite the list of mistakes identified. The report finds a breakdown in communication and confused messaging, an insular ministry seemingly not open to input from other sectors. It says some agencies were reluctant to even contemplate mandatory testing at the border. Officials were exhausted, it says, and did not prepare as well as they could have for an inevitable outbreak.
Naturally, the report focuses on areas where we need to do better. That's what we asked them to do. But I don't want to skip over the fact that people have worked incredibly hard to do something that's been unprecedented. And when you look at the overall outcomes that we've achieved, I think we can be proud of those.
It was left to Chris Hipkins as COVID-19 Response Minister to front today. No sign of the Prime Minister, no sign of the Health Ministry's chief, Dr. Ashley Bloomfield. Instead, in a statement, he said the ministry had learnt, reviewed and adjusted along the way to continually improve. ACT's leader David Seymour is unimpressed.
There's an unfortunate pattern that the Prime Minister and Director General of Health have been very happy to play a quasi-celebrity role around the public health crisis, but unwilling to front for important news when it is bad.
The government has promised a cash injection. It's prizing open its COVID-19 war chest to dole out another $1.1 billion for testing and contact tracing over the next 18 months. Another $1.7 billion has been allocated for running the isolation and quarantine hotels. A board of public sector chiefs will also be set up to oversee those facilities and the wider border. And a new COVID-19 response unit will take charge of strategic planning and leadership.
Everyone's clear on what the decisions are, everyone's now clear on what their roles are, what their expectations of them are, and I'm confident going forward that we can continue to keep strengthening.
But National's Chris Bishop thinks the government should go one step further.
We need a clear line of accountability to a single border agency with a single minister, which the government's now done, so that's a good thing. We've got Chris Hipkins, who's the single minister responsible, but we also need a single agency underneath him communicating clearly with the public around the border.
The government says its new approach will be in place by March next year. It's been sitting on an initial version of this report since late September and a final copy for about a month. One has to wonder why it's only being released now, on this last Friday before Christmas and well after Parliament's end. Matu i te whare parimata mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Craig McCulloch hou.
As many Kiwi households prepare to head off for camping holidays over the coming weeks, others are already parked up in caravans across the country. That's because they live there year-round, unable to afford the skyrocketing rents, let alone house prices. Some of those families have complex health needs, including Jeff Ward. Jeff has Parkinson's disease and his health is slowly declining. But right now, he and his wife can only afford to live in a caravan due to their benefit budget constraints. Our cameraman Nick Monroe and reporter Nita Blake-Person went to see them.
The sun and cicadas are in full force at this Bay of Plenty campground, the quintessential Kiwi summer. But for Maureen Ward and her husband Jeff, this is no Christmas holiday.
Christmas, we've got no room in the caravan. We've got 3 boxes of Christmas decorations in Tokoroa, but we've got no room in the caravan for things like a Christmas tree or anything like that. Basically not really going to celebrate it this year.
Maureen and Jeff moved in about 5 months ago. Rising house prices right across the region have pushed up rents, forcing them from one town to another.
We have struggled for quite some time. About 9 years ago, my husband was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. And we did own a home, but we lost that home when Jeff was made redundant. And ever since then, we have actually struggled. Rentals now in Tokoroa are up to $400 to $450 a week for a 3-bedroom house, which is virtually 3/4 of our benefit. So there's just no way that we could have afforded to continue to stay in Tokoroa. This is our space. This is the inside of our caravan, where
Unable to afford a house, they decided to rent a caravan, roughly $160 a week for the site and $175 for the caravan itself. It's a large space with a compact kitchen, bathroom, lounge and bedroom. They've made immaculate use of it, including a thriving veggie garden. And while it may seem idyllic on a hot summer's day, it's a nightmare situation for Jeff's declining health.
Though we enjoy living here, long term this is not suitable for my husband. As he deteriorates, this is going to get to a point where he's not going to cope with having to, take grey water over to the shower block and having to empty porta potties and all that sort of stuff.
But their budget means they have no choice and face a lengthy wait for accessible public housing. Maureen is a qualified early childhood teacher but is out of work at the moment due to an injury, so they're both on the benefit. She says that's not nearly enough to cover the realities of current living costs, despite their tight budget.
We get a power bill or a phone bill or the car breaks down and we're like, how on earth are we going to pay that? Because sometimes it can actually smash our budget completely. And it does cause stress. As I said, I've cried bucketfuls at times. I had real battles with winds this year and I'd get off the phone totally frustrated and angry because they make us feel like it's our fault. When it's not our fault that my husband got sick. That's not his fault.
And this caravan park is full of people who know those frustrations all too well, like this recent arrival.
Well, I was in Whakatane. I was on emergency accommodation for ages and getting help from winds all the time about how much it was costing. So then Australian government decided to let go of the Kiwi Super. And so I got the money to buy this. It's not roadworthy, but at least it's like now I've got a home to live in and this is an awesome spot. So, yeah, but the council and that doesn't seem to be doing much about the housing down there. No one seems to want to know about it.
And this mother who's lived here for more than 2 years with her daughter.
It was less of a choice than a necessity. We were sharing a house with other families for a year and a half before I found this place. So when the opportunity came to buy a caravan here and have our own place instead of having to share with families. At one point we were 10 people in a house with one bathroom and have our own place. Yeah, we jumped at it.
She says most campgrounds in the area are full with people living with similar benefit budgets, all of whom are at the whim of the campground owners.
You don't have any rights because you're not supposed to live permanently in a campground. I think the bylaw rules are generally 100 days per year. But because there's nowhere else to go, the reality is people are living full-time. Winds are putting people into campgrounds full-time.
Many of the residents live here full-time. Most Checkpoint spoke to said it was all they could afford and they had nowhere else to go. Maureen says there's a stigma attached to people living in campgrounds which makes finding work hard, trapping them on the benefit and out of the housing market.
Nobody in this campground are no-hopers. They are good people who are just can't afford to rent or can't afford to buy.
But she says things needn't be this bad. If benefits were to increase, she believes it would go a long way.
The government needs to see that we are not in a position because we're lazy. We're not in a position because my husband doesn't want to work. He'd much rather go out to work. And that we're not going to be able to work. So, why should we have to renew our medical certificate every 2 years?
As she continues to wait for a change in income or circumstances, the emergency housing waitlist her and Jeff are on continues to grow. This month, the housing register hit a record high, nearly 22,000 applicants, with the government this week advised many of those waiting are unlikely to receive a house. So for now, it's campground Christmases as the housing crisis continues. For Checkpoint, Nita Blakeperson.
And if you were listening to that story from Nita and Nick, please do go and look at the video. We'll put it online. And Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, an adventure tourism review has operators worried about being bogged down in bureaucracy. The plug's been pulled on the WOMAD Festival, but the lights are very much still on in New Plymouth. Aussie authorities restrict travel as Sydney's COVID beach cluster grows into a wave. We would love your feedback. Do get in touch. Let us know what it's like on the roads out there as well. Text us on 2101 if it's safe to do so, and you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Our email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time now for the headlines with Susanna.
A woman has appeared in Auckland District Court on charges relating to threats targeting graduation ceremonies at Otago University. The police allege she was threatening to use guns and explosives of a magnitude surpassing the March 15th terrorist attacks in Christchurch. The woman was granted interim name suppression and remanded on bail. She is due back in court in February. Cyclone Yasa has killed at least 2 people on Fiji's second biggest island of Vanuatu, where the Category 5 storm flattened homes, brought down power lines and stripped the land of vegetation. The storm has been downgraded to Category 3, but another curfew is in place tonight and nearly 24,000 people are sheltering in evacuation centres. New Zealand is sending an Air Force Orion to Fiji to help assess the cyclone damage and provide emergency relief kits to the High Commission in Suva. The local share market has closed down 207 points or 1.6% after A2 Milk downgraded its earnings outlook. A2's share price fell more than 20%, dragging the NZX Top 50 index with it. Opposition parties are accusing the government of being cynical with its release of a critical report into the COVID testing strategy. National MP Chris Bishop says the report is damning and is very disappointing the government took until the Friday before Christmas to release it. Auckland man Manchao Lee will spend at least 19 years in prison for murdering his ex-wife in a frenzied knife attack. He killed Yang Zimin after dragging her from a footpath in the West Auckland suburb of Massey last July. A commission is being appointed to run Tauranga City Council after it failed to provide enough evidence of how it's fixing its problems. The local government minister, Nanaia Mahuta, says appointing commissioners means a by-election will not have to be held. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. And it's business news time with Nicholas Poynton, who's in the studio. Nicholas, I reckon your first company you're talking about is A2, is it?
Yes, we probably got a bit of a preview there in the bulletin. The company has significantly revised its full-year guidance. And this is company, it's a top 10 stock. It's worth about $10 billion. But it's really been hit hard by these border closures this year because a lot of its infant formula sales are sold through the Daigou channel, and this is where Chinese students and tourists or other unofficial buyers come to New Zealand, snap up their products, take them back home and then on-sell them to people in China. But the problem is with border closures, you can imagine that avenue of revenue has really been cut off. And they did notify that this was going to be a challenge this year back in September when they lowered their forecast to between $725 and $775 million for the full year, no small amount, but the effect of this has clearly been a lot more than they first thought because they've gone and cut their guidance by a further $100 million to $670 million. The company's CEO does expect a recovery in the second half of 2021, but it's going to be slower because of these ongoing travel restrictions. And as we mentioned, as you heard in the bulletin, earlier, on the back of this news alone, A2 has brought down the whole share market by about 200 points. That's the sort of weight that this company has on our stock exchange. Its share price fell 22%. We haven't seen a company's stock tumble like that in a long, long time. It's now down to $11. It started the day at about $14.
Isn't it remarkable? Like, you would expect people to pick up some product and take it home and sell it on or move it on. Isn't it remarkable that that volume is so significant, it would have this effect.
One thing that we've heard about with this company, it's the New Zealand brand, and with our dairy products, they do carry such a premium. There's such a high demand for them. So I think that maybe goes to explain why when these people take these products back to their home countries, there's such an appetite for them. And because of the appetite, they buy so much all at once. But they've also been affected in Australia as well by their ongoing restrictions. People there who buy their products aren't also able to take them home. So yeah, really a sort of a shocking result. And clearly, investors today, when they saw this news, really didn't like what they were seeing.
Okay. All right. You reckon it's Bitcoin's time to shine? Sell it to me, Nicholas. Go.
Look, in the interest of full disclosure, I must say I do not own any Bitcoin, any crypto assets of any kind, but the crypto asset has reached an all-time high. It saw nearly 18% in the past week. A single Bitcoin will net you 32,000 New Zealand dollars. And I know people are probably thinking, are we really doing this all again with Bitcoin? People who probably keep an eye on this asset remember probably back in 2017, it went on an absolute march. It had this precipitous rise, which sort of absolutely defied belief. And then there was a major correction in 2018. Those people who'd probably looked and felt really smart for investing in Bitcoin started to look a little bit silly. But look, we've seen this massive rise over this year, but it's not, another correction isn't out of the equation. But it's fair to say that a number of things has changed since 2017, which makes the chances of that happening a lot less likely. First of all, globally, interest rates are well down and people are looking for better places to put their money other than a bank. So that's one thing Bitcoin has got going for it. The other thing is that people's attitude to the asset class has really changed as well. It's really gaining traction as a mature and legitimate asset. It's really been helped by the progress in the policy space in this country. I've done stories earlier this year about how IRD has released a guidance on how they plan to tax the asset. IRD has now gone out to crypto marketplaces and asked them to hand over the information for their customers so they can ensure that their customers are fulfilling their tax obligations. And while people who own the asset may not like that, it actually goes a long way to giving the asset a sense of legitimacy. And this is partly why you've seen a lot more big institutional investors beginning to enter the market. They've seen their gains. They can't see gains like that over the past 3 months and just say no. So they've been looking to enter into the market, and that in turn, that leads more retail investors to start considering the asset. I've talked to you before about how the demographic of crypto investors has changed. It used to be the domain of young white men, but now we're seeing more women and older people start to enter into this. And look, it really has been sort of remarkable to watch, and I know people sort of laugh when I talk about this sort of thing because I am actually quite interested in it, but it is worth noting that headwinds do remain. A lot of investment analysts, they do predict that next year we're going to start seeing the monetary stimulus we've been seeing on a global scale, quantitative easing program, money printing, that sort of thing, that's going to start to ease. Many are expecting in the second half of 2021, and that in turn, like all assets, will probably start to see a bit of a wobble in asset prices, and that may affect the price of Bitcoin.
Okay, you gave us a bit of an entree into the markets. Let's have the main.
Yeah, just to recap, it's down 207 points on the back of that news about A2 milk. It's down to 12,682. Our dollar is at 71 US, 93.7 Australian, and 52.7 British pence.
Thanks, Nicholas. Nicholas Poynton with business there. Tourism operators are worried they're being bogged down by bureaucracy following a review of adventure activities near natural hazards. Today, the first findings were revealed after a review was first triggered by the Whakaari eruption. WorkSafe has come under increased scrutiny for not providing enough oversight of the sector. Tourism reporter Tess Brunton has more.
Adventure Consultants Chief Executive Guy Cotter doesn't want to see safety become more of a box-ticking exercise that's more focused on punishing companies than protecting people. He's worried about WorkSafe playing a larger regulating role.
We get more people who are not familiar with the area that they're auditing, and the only way they can actually do that is by having more boxes to tick. that doesn't lead to an increased level of safety. That just is more of a burden on the operator.
Totally Tourism offers rafting, heli-ski tours, boat cruises and scenic flights around Queenstown, Milford Sound, Aoraki, Mount Cook and the West Coast. Its director, Mark Quickfall, says tourism operators are overseen by a range of regulatory bodies, including Civil Aviation and Maritime New Zealand.
Those regulatory bodies have specific expertise and abilities in those areas. So, I'd be nervous to see that dumbed down. But the best model to me is to have a regulator, but also have the industry bodies and the operators working together. There's no question the operators have the greatest incentive to make sure everyone stays safe.
Increasing on-site audits from once every 3 years, spot checks, engaging more sector experts and ensuring WorkSafe prioritises the industry are some of the possible changes to be discussed following the review. Mark Quickfall welcomes the latest review but says whatever changes come out of it need to be targeted and achievable.
You don't want to swamp operators' administration bureaucracy to the point where they're very compliant, but they're not safe because everybody does have to get out and operate each day. It's probably better to make sure the systems and processes are correct than overloading with unnecessary bureaucracy.
Adrift Tongariro Guides Director Stuart Barclay says the sector is on the whole doing an excellent job with safety, but they can always improve. One area he thinks should be looked at is who is subject to safety regulation and who isn't. His company faces strict regulations and auditing to run guided walks on Tongariro in winter and summer, but says that wouldn't be the case if they cut their winter trips.
If we were operating in summer, then under the current regime rules, we would not required to have to be registered with the WorkSafe and have a professional third-party auditor audit us. In summer, you often get, for example, a school teacher guiding a school party up the mountain who have no safety systems for mountains at all, and I think that needs to be looked at.
WorkSafe has laid criminal charges against 13 parties in relation to the Whakaari eruption. Today, Workplace Relations and Safety Minister Michael Wood confirmed WorkSafe will undergo an independent review to assess if its response to the eruption was adequate and appropriate, and if there were further steps it should have taken. He wouldn't comment on whether the regulator could face charges, but says he understands why particularly impacted families want answers and accountability.
I think the confidence that we can give families is that WorkSafe have behaved without any fear or favour. We've had 13 sets of charges laid across both private and public sector entities, and now the government is working to ensure that we do have assurance about WorkSafe's role as well. So we're looking at every aspect of the events leading up to the tragedy.
He wants to assure operators they won't be swamped with more paperwork, but says people need to feel safe to try the activities. Tourism Industry Aotearoa Chief Executive Chris Roberts says the review isn't looking to impose new rules or tighten existing ones. Instead, he says it's ensuring WorkSafe isn't taking its eye off the ball and is providing proper oversight so other organisations, including his own, aren't picking up the slack.
I mean, there's an example in the report of how little attention WorkSafe was paying in the fact that their authorisation of the certifying bodies lapsed for 15 months, and the audits carried out for those 15 months had to be subsequently reconfirmed. I think that's just an indication of how little attention WorkSafe was paying.
Consultation on how to further improve safety is set to begin next year. For Checkpoint, Cortes Brunton, tēnei.
The COVID-19 cluster in Sydney's northern beaches has grown by 10, bringing the total number of cases to 28. And the outbreak is prompting fresh restrictions on interstate travellers just a week out from Christmas. Our World Watch reporter Paulina Lau has more.
Authorities in New South Wales are scrambling to get on top of the Avalon outbreak, with residents of the northern beaches told to stay home. Overnight, cases climbed by 10, bringing the total to 28. State Premier Gladys Berejiklian is urging residents to stay home and only leave if absolutely necessary.
Can I please stress to everybody,
in and around Avalon and the northern beaches that for the next 3 days you should not be leaving your home unless it's absolutely necessary. Please make sure that if you do leave your home for necessary business that you wear a mask, especially if you're going grocery shopping, especially if you're catching public transport. If we get on top of this in the next 2 or 3 days, all of us will be able to have a much better Christmas. But if we don't get on top of it in the next few days, it could mean further restrictions down the track. We don't want to go for that.
She confirmed it is an international strain of the virus, and although they still don't know how it entered the community, they believe it began spreading through the Avalon RSL. A separate case in a South Sydney van driver who transports international airline staff to Sydney Airport has been genomically sequenced, with New South Wales Chief Health Officer Dr Kerry Chant saying it's likely he caught it while working.
The genome sequencing has demonstrated that strain that gentleman had was most likely a US strain, and that is consistent with the hypothesis we have that inadvertent transmission by a flight crew that he was transporting was the source of his infection.
Dr Chant says no further cases have been associated with the driver and his exposure in the community was limited. Meanwhile, the New South Wales Premier says air crews will no longer be able to self-isolate in their own homes and will be required to go into police-operated hotels. As the case numbers climb, huge queues have formed outside testing clinics in northern Sydney, and the airport is full of travellers hoping to get to other states before borders are locked down.
There's a lot of people here, and as soon as you walk in, you do feel a bit of anxiety. It's difficult to socially distance with this many people in one place, but we're not going to miss it. Not going to miss out.
I'm going for a Christmas party. I'm going to see people I haven't seen for 2 years, so I'm going. If I get on that plane and they say it's not happening, I just want to come back. I don't want to be stuck there.
New South Wales Health Minister Martin Foley says there's no room for complacency.
Well, I think we'd have to say that from being out and about the last 2 weeks, the complacency is no longer creeping, it's an avalanche. We need to actually have all of the community aware again that we are in the middle of a worldwide COVID pandemic. And I think it's time for us, with the Avalon cluster has served as a very timely reminder to all of us, particularly those in the broader regions of Sydney. There is no room for complacency. Until we have a vaccine, we don't have a solution.
One person who contracted the virus in Sydney has since travelled to Queensland, which is now on high alert, declaring the northern beaches a hotspot. Anyone who's been there since the 11th of December will be required to go into hotel quarantine for 14 days upon arrival. South Australia is keeping its borders open, but Western Australia has wasted no time reinstating a hard border with New South Wales today. Authorities say it's a critical time and are reiterating to residents to get tested if they develop symptoms. For Checkpoint, Paulina Lau.
It is 6 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. While WOMAD has pulled the plug because of COVID, New Plymouth's famous Festival of the Lights has overcome the challenges of the pandemic to put on a show. This year, 15 brand new installations with intriguing names such as Shrooms, UV Spaghetti, and I'm not really sure how you're supposed to say this one, Hybo Kozo, will compete for attention alongside a busy music program, a feature of the free council-run event since the 1970s. Our Taranaki Whanganui reporter Robin Martin went along to the launch last night for a sneak preview.
From humble beginnings in 1953, when the Poets' Bridge in Pukakura Park was lit up to celebrate Queen Elizabeth II's coronation, the TSB Festival of Lights has grown into an event spanning 50 days and nights. But it hasn't been plain sailing this year, with COVID meaning international artists have been unable to get into the country and organisers have had to deal with the vagaries of overseas shipping. Lighting and operations manager Fraser Ross says, if anything, that's brought people closer together.
We have got a few international pieces this year, and the artists are really prepared to let our lighting team install them. You know, getting an artist sending over their work and getting a local team to install it is a scary thought, but we've built that trust.
His favourite such piece is by Renzo La Rivera and Zara Passfield of Peru and Australia, respectively.
They've created a lily pad piece for us this year and some monkeys. It ties into the zoo. So they've made those out of polypropylene, so it's all recyclable, and they're lit with LEDs, and they look $1 million. So that's the highlight, working with them and them building something new for us.
Kiwi artist Anthony Van Dorsten has pitched in to install the international pieces, including shrooms by Australian light sculptors Amigo Amigo. Bright and colourful, these larger-than-life fungi evoke Alice in Wonderland and will have young and old venturing into the rabbit hole that is the sunken dell.
Yeah, Simone Chua is the lead creative for Amigo and Amigo, and she really doesn't let anything get in the way of creating things big and beautiful and playful. And the mushrooms are, just one of her many, many creations that tour around the world.
Van Dorsten also has his own piece on display, Full Spectrum, a tunnel of 7 hexagonal light sculptures that celebrate unity and diversity in nature and humanity. Lisa Ekdale is the festival's entertainment curator. She says an upside of COVID is that so many quality New Zealand acts are in the country, which is reflected in the Hatchery Lawn lineup.
So we've got some great headline acts, including Solar Rosa on New Year's Eve, Reb Fountain, who was a WOMAD favourite. We also have the Waratahs, which is an amazing country family favourite, kicking off on the 19th, Saturday. So, and also 50% of the entertainment are local performers. So we mix it up, out-of-towners, locals.
Lisa says the music program has become an integral part of the festival.
I think it brings people together. People that might not normally pay to go to a gig might come along, get a taste of it and go, actually, this is really fabulous. I love it, love the atmosphere. I can come here with my family, I can bring a picnic and BYO and just connect with people and feel good.
And you won't get any argument on that front from local Alessandra Keeley.
Festival of Lights, I think, is worthy of study. Like, what it must do for social cohesion and community connectedness is phenomenal. And having been here for quite some time, you get to see the teenagers going wild, and a few years later they're pushing pushchairs with babies, frowning at the teenagers going wild. I love the Festival of Lights.
And the light installations themselves?
Oh yes, they're not necessarily the biggest thing for me because live music is my drug of choice, and so I love the fact that I get to be with my community dancing.
The Festival of Lights attracts more than 100,000 visitors each year, and a 2017 Economic Impact Report found it pumped just under $5 million into the local economy, a figure organisers say will have only grown since. The switch on the 2020-2021 edition gets flicked tomorrow night at 8:30, coinciding with the Waratahs' appearance on the Hatchery Lawn stage. The festival wraps up on January the 31st. I ngā mutu mo te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko Robin Martinaho.
A few of you getting in touch about our earlier interview on the ports of Auckland. That was with Craig Harrison from the Maritime Union. Jonathan says good health and safety culture starts at the top. It's not about high-vis, hard hats and cones. The issue is, why are the workers shy in reporting safety concerns? Seems like the work environment is not healthy. Another listener says it was disrespectful of the CEO of Auckland Ports to say cause workers are Māori or Pacific, they don't follow safety refs or report safety breaches. And he did not own the wrong assumption that freight business would be 30% down due to COVID, hence the current backlog. And it says he certainly doesn't deserve a salary of around $800,000.
RNZ News at 6, ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leātaua tēnei. As Fiji begins assessing the extent of the damage caused by Cyclone Yasa, the United Nations has met with government officials to discuss how the global body can help. The Category 5 storm wreaked havoc across the country, leaving 2 people dead, including a 3-month-old baby, and thousands more homeless. The UN's Pacific representative, Sanaka Saramasina, says it stands ready to assist Fiji.
We, of course, have a number of personnel here, almost 600, and pre-positioned supplies in warehouses here and in Brisbane, some of which we intend to bring in already tomorrow.
Sanaka Saramasina is accompanying a government delegation to inspect the extent of the damage on Vanua Levu, which bore the brunt of the storm. New Zealand is sending an Air Force Orion to Fiji to assess the damage caused by Cyclone Yasa. The Foreign Minister, Nanaia Mahuta, says New Zealand stands ready to provide support to the Fiji government. She says emergency relief kits and the funding will be released to the High Commission in Suva to respond to needs on the ground. A woman has appeared in court in Auckland on charges relating to threats targeting graduation ceremonies at the University of Otago. Police allege she was threatening to carry out an attack using guns and explosives of a magnitude surpassing the March 15th attacks in Christchurch. The woman was given interim name suppression, and aspects of the hearing were heavily suppressed when she appeared in the district court this afternoon. She was remanded on bail and is due to appear back in court in February. The National Party says it's cynical of the government to wait until today to release a critical report that found significant failings in the COVID testing strategy. The independent report highlights shoddy communication, a lack of clear leadership and confusing processes. The final report was sent to the Minister last month. National's COVID-19 response spokesperson Chris Bishop says the report shows the border response wasn't as good as it could have been and there needs to be improvements.
This is a damning report into contact tracing and our response at the border, and frankly it's very disappointing it's taken until the Friday before Christmas for the government to release it.
Chris Bishop says New Zealanders should be able to access the report far earlier. Some employees of Ports of Auckland have boycotted work today after comments made by the port CEO on RNZ's checkpoint program. Tony Gibson said Māori and Pasifika staff were too shy to come forward about safety issues. The port was recently fined $540,000 after a worker was killed when his straddle crane tipped. The port is also under pressure for delays in unloading freight at the busiest time of the year. Maritime Union National Secretary Craig Harrison believes Mr Gibson's comments are disrespectful.
It doesn't give the people, those people, the credit for the knowledge they bring to the table and who they are as workers.
Craig Harrison also believes that no one in port management is taking ownership for safety issues. The police in Hamilton have arrested and charged a man over owning a dog that fatally mauled a newborn baby in October. Emergency services were called to a house in Macefield Drive on October the 25th. The one-day-old baby was rushed to hospital in a serious condition but died overnight. The police have confirmed a 21-year-old man is due to appear in the Hamilton District Court this afternoon, charged with owning a dog that caused injury and death. A commission is being appointed to run the troubled Tauranga City Council. It comes after the resignation of the Mayor Tenby Powell last month. Kay Albert reports.
The Minister of Local Government, Nanaia Mahuta, says the decision to appoint a commission comes after the council failed to provide sufficient evidence on how it's addressing its issues. Earlier this year there was infighting among councillors, and before he resigned, Tenby Powell wrote to the Minister saying that commissioners were needed to break the stranglehold successive councillors had on a lack of progress. Ms Mahuta says commissioners will help to pave the way for the next set of decisions which are due to be made, and means a by-election does not have to be held. Ko Kay Albert tēnei.
The local share market has had a massive fall in the latter part of the session after the top 50 heavyweight A2 milk downgraded its earnings outlook, causing its share price to fall. A2's share price fell more than 20%, dragging the NZX top 50 index with it. Before A2's news, the local share market had hit a record high. It closed down 207 points or 1.6% to 12,682. It's coming up to 5 minutes past 6. The Black Caps cricket coach Gary Stead is predicting Pakistan will provide his side with a much sterner test than the West Indies. The New Zealanders completed T20 and Test series victories over the Windies and start a 3-match T20 series against Pakistan at Eden Park tonight before 2 tests after Christmas.
They have a very good balance, I think, of their bowling attack. They've got good pace bowlers, they've got left armers, right armers, good, obviously a world-class leg spinner as well. And they've got some very exciting batsmen.
The first ball in tonight's opening T20 is set for 7 o'clock. Team New Zealand made it 2 wins from 2 races against Team UK on the second day of the America's Cup World Series sailing event in Auckland. The hosts won both races on the Waitemata Harbour by more than 1 minute. Despite Despite the losses, the British team showed significant improvement from day one when they experienced mechanical problems. Luna Rossa and American Magic split their 2 races today, with the Italians winning the opening race by 12 seconds and the Americans sitting back with a 30-second victory in their second clash. The Black Sticks men are set to lose 550 caps of experience as Aaron Panchia, Marcus Child and Corey Bennett announce their retirement from international hockey. The trio helped the New Zealand team to a silver medal at the 2018 Commonwealth Games, and Panchia is the 5th most capped Black Stick of all time. That's the news.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
It's not a surprise that something of this monstrous nature has kind of landed at our doorstep.
Live with local, national and international stories as they happen.
You have sort of heart flutter as imagining what might happen if that thing dropped off the crane.
Up to date if you're up late. Lately with Karen Hay every weeknight from 10 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. In the west from Northland to Wellington, mostly fine, but cloudy periods, especially overnight. Coromandel Peninsula and Bay of Plenty, fine spells, however, cloudy morning and night with patchy drizzle. Taumaranui, Taupo and Taihape mainly fine with isolated showers. Gisborne to Wairarapa, also Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine with high cloud at times about Marlborough and Canterbury. A few patches of lower cloud about Christchurch and Banks Peninsula. For Bulla, cloudy periods and Westland and Fiordland light rain, clearing Westland this evening. Rain becoming persistent and heavier in Fiordland tonight, spreading to Westland tomorrow. Otago and Southland mostly cloudy, scattered rain clearing for a time tonight. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods. RNZ National, it's coming up to 8 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Grace Mullane's killer has lost his bid to overturn his conviction and sentence for murdering the British backpacker, but he still cannot be named. Name suppression was due to lapse this morning with the release of the Court of Appeal's judgment, but the 28-year-old man's legal team mounted a last-ditch appeal to the Supreme Court to keep his identity secret. Our reporter Sarah Robson has been following the case.
The 28-year-old man took his case to the Court of Appeal back in August. Now, just to recap, he had been found guilty of murdering Grace Mullane after that highly publicised 3-week trial in the High Court in Auckland late last year. Now, Grace Mullane had gone missing at the end of 2018 and her body was found buried in the Waitakere Ranges about a week later. Now, during the man's trial, we heard details about how he had strangled Ms. Mullane in his apartment after they'd been on a Tinder date. The jury saw CCTV footage of him buying a suitcase, cleaning products, and hiring a car and carpet cleaner. Now, during the trial, the man's lawyers argued that Ms. Mullane's death was an accident during consensual rough sex, but the jury didn't buy that, returning its guilty verdict. He was sentenced back in February to life imprisonment with 17-year non-parole period. But in the Court of Appeal in August, he argued that he didn't get a fair trial and that sentence was too harsh. Now, in this Court of Appeal decision that was released this morning, they dismissed his appeals against both his conviction and his sentence.
So this person has had name suppression and it was due to lapse today. What's gone on there?
That's right. So the Court of Appeal confirmed yesterday that name suppression was due to lapse when its judgment was released this morning. Now, that would have meant for the first time that media in New Zealand would have been able to publish the man's name. However, this morning, his legal team made a last-ditch bid to the Supreme Court to stop that from happening. And this morning, the Supreme Court has issued a decision that will extend the man's name suppression until further order of the court.
OK. Has Grace Mullane's family had anything to say today?
They've released a statement via the police today saying that they were pleased with the outcome of the Court of Appeal's decision. Once again, they've thanked for the police, they've thanked for the judges involved, as well as the police investigation team headed up by Scott Beard, who of course have spent many hours in communication with the family and offering them support. They also once again thanked the people of New Zealand for their support over the last 2 years since their daughter went missing. And they said that while the focus today would be on the outcome of the Court of Appeal case, they said that their thoughts would always be with their daughter.
Sarah Robson reporting there. A burning ship at Nature's Port sent thick black clouds of smoke billowing into the sky, while police forced pedestrians to clear the area due to potentially toxic fumes. About 60 firefighters battled the blaze, which shut roads around the port for hours. Our Hawke's Bay reporter Tom Kitchen has more.
A port worker who witnessed the ship fire at Napier Port says he's never seen anything like it. Trevor Thackeray is a stevedore for SSA. He was there the moment the vessel, which had sailed from China, caught on fire.
Just seen some grey smoke coming out, just mildly. I actually thought it was a heavy vehicle having a cold start, but then the smoke started going black and then, a lot more darker and bigger.
He then went up higher, live streaming a video of the smoke billowing out of the ship.
Sort of got out of control, one part there. There's a couple of loud explosions, and then I think probably around 12:30, they started closing the number one hatch, which is at the forward end of the ship at the bow, and to deprive the flames of oxygen. Quite spectacular. Never seen anything like that before.
James Hooker went to the top of Bluff Hill above the port to get a closer look at the fire. The smell of the smoke first drew his blackmate's attention to it.
He said, "Oh, can you smell something burning?" And we kind of looked around and we're like, "No, can't see anything." And he went into the kitchen and said, "Oh my God, look, there's a fire." So we walked out and saw that the fire was coming from the port area. And then, of course, we jumped in the car and went up Bluff Hill Lookout to try and get a bit of view. And there's just so many cars up there because obviously everyone else was going up too. So then we kind of went up there for a bit, had a look around, took some photos. And then because there were too many people coming up, we were like, "Oh, let's do our part and clear out." And as we were coming back down, we saw that there were police cars everywhere and all the roads had been blocked off leading up to the hill.
About 60 firefighters worked alongside port staff and the captain of the ship to bring the blaze under control. Fire and Emergency Incident Commander Nigel Hall says they were first alerted about 11:15. He says police asked residents in houses overlooking the port to shut their windows or evacuate because of the smoke.
Anyone who is suffering any ill effects from that smoke just needs to go to the hospital. But the smoke was not directly on the hill. It was quite luckily it was blowing sort of parallel to the sea and out to sea, really.
He says the fire was brought under control by about 1:30, but firefighters will remain at the scene for some hours yet.
We'll remain at the scene for a few more hours because currently we're just monitoring the temperature of the hold where the fire was, and we'll be doing that for another few hours yet, just to make sure that the fire has been extinguished by the onboard extinguisher.
He says it's too early to say what caused it, but an investigation is underway. The ship's understood to be the Koutou Bahagia, which travelled straight here from China. The local DHB says the risk of any of the crew having COVID's low, as it's been at sea for 17 days. But as a precaution, all crew are getting a COVID test this afternoon. Those living nearby are advised to keep their windows and doors closed to keep smoke out, although the DHB says for healthy people the effects of smoke are usually short-term and don't cause any long-term problems. But if people have difficulty breathing or prolonged symptoms, they should call their GP or healthline, and if it's a real emergency, call 111.
And that was our Hawke's Bay reporter Tom Kitchen there. It is almost 15 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. A host of European leaders are self-isolating after French President Emmanuel Macron tested positive for COVID-19. Mr Macron will isolate for a week while working remotely. The President attended a number of high-profile events in recent days, including an EU summit. The ABC's Samantha Hawley has more.
On the streets of Paris, an eyebrow was barely raised as the people learnt their president had COVID-19. It doesn't bother me, this woman says. It's clear when you multiply contacts, you can get it. He's like everybody, says this man. He faces the same threat as his fellow countrymen. The Elysee Palace delivered the news via a press release, followed by a brief statement from government spokesman Gabriel Attal. Last night, the President of the Republic started to feel symptoms corresponding to those of COVID-19, he says, explaining a test was immediately undertaken and confirmed the positive result. I want to insist on the fact that it reminds us that the virus circulates in the world and in France, and that even when you're extremely careful, you can be contaminated. Furious contract tracing started immediately. President Macron's wife has no symptoms but is self-isolating. But he'd also had a string of high-level meetings in the past week. The day before his positive test, he embraced the Prime Minister of Portugal, Antonio Costa, ahead of a meeting in Paris. He's now self-isolating as he awaits a test result. He also had lunch with the leader of the European Union and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen as they worked through last-minute Brexit complexities. At the same lunch was the Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, who announced he'd suspend public activities as a precaution, although he has tested negative for now. The French Prime Minister is also self-isolating. France is grappling with a surge in cases similar to other European nations. President Macron will continue to work from self-isolation.
The ABC's Samantha Hawley. As the COVID-19 cluster in Sydney's northern beaches grows to 28, the outbreak is prompting fresh restrictions on interstate travellers just a week out from Christmas. Authorities are scrambling to get on top of the surge, and residents of the northern beaches local government area have been asked to stay at home. Meanwhile, on the other side of the country, within a matter of hours, Western Australia went from asking travellers to get a test and wait for a result to reinstating its hard border with New South Wales starting today. The ABC's Bridget Fitzgerald reports.
We've been to 3 hospitals and 3 hospitals. I rang the police that sent me the text message. They said, we can't help you.
There was confusion and frustration outside Royal Perth Hospital last night. Anyone who arrived in Perth from New South Wales from the 11th of December was told they had to get a COVID test as soon as possible and self-isolate until they had a negative result. Perth man Dylan had just arrived back from a business trip in Sydney.
We got the text and I think I came within 5 or 10 minutes of getting the text, and there was a long queue, so I was a bit surprised,
Travellers weren't notified about the new entry arrangements until mid-afternoon, and those waiting in line were initially told they'd all get tested. The clinic suddenly closed just after 6 p.m, and everyone was sent away.
Come back tomorrow. They're just closed.
Sorry, do you mind if I ask? I work for the ABC.
Yeah.
What were you just told?
Basically, just to come back tomorrow because they're shut. There's no more tests.
So you haven't had a test?
No, haven't had a test, nothing. So we're just going to have to go home, go find a hotel or something like that, and then coming back and try this all over again.
These men just told me that they were told that they would be taken care of.
They just did an announcement and people have just been walking, so it's done. It's done for today. That's bollocks.
A short time later, the WA government announced anyone arriving into the state from New South Wales from today will have to get tested and self-isolate for a full 14 days. As the number of confirmed cases in Sydney's northern beaches grows, authorities are working hard to try and limit the spread. New South Wales Health has advised that people living in the northern beaches local government area, some 270,000 residents, stay home as much as possible over the next 3 days to limit the spread, including working from home where possible and avoiding unnecessary gatherings or travel.
And that report was from the ABC. More than 2/3 of the population in England will soon be living under the toughest coronavirus restrictions. From Saturday, 38 million people will be living in what's called Tier 3 as cases surge. But the UK government's still forging ahead with plans to relax the rules for Christmas, prompting fears of another nationwide lockdown in January. The BBC's Hugh Pym reports.
This is what Tier 3 looks like. Bars, pubs and some other venues closed. It's what many areas of England have experienced for some time, and now more parts of the southeast are moving into, following others yesterday. The government said the tightening was required to bring cases down and help the NHS.
Yesterday, the Welsh Government made the decision to tighten restrictions across the whole of Wales. No one wants tougher restrictions any longer than necessary. But where they are necessary, we must put them in place to prevent the NHS from being overwhelmed and protect life.
Labour offered support for the new tier moves, but called for tougher rules over Christmas. Portsmouth, Gosport and Havant have moved up from Tier 2 to Tier 3. Health officials say virus case rates in all age groups are increasing across most of the area. Local people gave us their reaction to tighter restrictions.
I think we should have been put into Tier 3 a bit sooner, just to sort of keep it lower again.
Portsmouth has got quite a high rate of COVID, and I think we're only half that rate. And I know we're so close, it must be awkward, but I think it would have been better to stay in Tier 2.
In Tier 3 areas, pubs, bars and restaurants will be closed apart from takeaways, and that'll still be the case over the Christmas period, even though up to 3 households are allowed to mix over that time. Pressure on most hospitals is mounting, with more COVID patients arriving each day, and there are fewer beds than normal because of social distancing measures. Here's what's been happening with daily COVID hospital admissions in the southeast of England. The solid line there is the 7-day rolling average. And you can see it's been rising pretty steeply in recent weeks and is back where it was in late April, just after the peak of the first wave. And here's what's been happening in the northwest of England. Hospital admissions rose sharply throughout October and then came down a bit, though they do appear to have levelled off.
The BBC's Hugh Pym. Coronavirus cases, hospitalisations and deaths are higher than ever in the US, but President Trump hasn't made any comment about the worsening pandemic. Vice President Mike Pence is expected to get a vaccine on camera tomorrow, while Mr Trump continues to fight election results on baseless claims of voter fraud. CNN's Caitlin Collins has more.
Where's President Trump? President Trump's been hard at work on COVID behind the scenes.
It's a question many in Washington are asking. Where is President Trump? With only 5 weeks left in office, he stayed behind closed doors again today and hasn't made a public appearance since Saturday, when he took no questions from the White House press corps. In the middle of a devastating public health crisis where 3,000 Americans are dying per day, with a presidential transition underway, and national security officials still scrambling to understand the magnitude of a Russian cyber attack, Trump is nowhere to be found, and the few events he does hold are often closed to the press.
Well, hello, Georgia!
While Vice President Mike Pence, who campaigned in Georgia today, is scheduled to get the coronavirus vaccine on camera tomorrow, the White House hasn't said when Trump will, and neither has he. Trump's also said little about the coronavirus relief negotiations happening on Capitol Hill as hundreds of thousands of Americans filed for unemployment again this week.
We have a responsibility to get this right. People's lives depend upon it.
And as the scope of a hack by a Russian-linked group on the U.S. government and corporations becomes clearer, the president hasn't said a word or posted a single tweet. The White House declined to say whether Trump's been briefed by his top intelligence officials, who were all absent from his cabinet meeting yesterday.
This is virtually a declaration of war by Russia on the United States, and we should take that seriously.
Trump's own former officials are calling for his attention. In an op-ed published in the New York Times, his first Homeland Security advisor, Tom Bossert, wrote that Trump is, quote, on the verge of leaving behind a federal government compromised by the Russian government. President Trump must get past his grievances about the election and govern for the remainder of his term. The president doesn't appear to be listening. Instead, his Twitter feed today was filled with disinformation about the election, threats to veto the defense spending bill, and denials of his involvement in the investigation into Hunter Biden.
CNN's Caitlin Collins. Sam Cane capped his debut season as All Blacks captain with 2 honours at New Zealand Rugby's annual awards last night, taking out the overall Player of the Year as well as All Black of the Year. It's been a strange 2020 for the new skipper, from COVID disruptions to being beaten twice by Australia, losing to Argentina for the first time, but still managing to win the Bledisloe Cup and Tri-Nations title. The issue of head injuries is also back in the spotlight, as former players continue to join a class action lawsuit against World, England and Wales Rugby, which alleges a failure to protect them from the risks caused by concussions. Rugby reporter Joe Porter spoke to Cane about whether or not he feels World and New Zealand Rugby are doing enough to decrease the risk of head injuries and the flow-on effects.
Yeah, look, it's a tricky one, and my personal view is that the intention was never out to send players out there to have brain injuries or to hurt themselves further. It was just a pure lack of knowledge in that area. So we're really fortunate, I think. Look, who knows, I reckon maybe in 10 years' time, some of the stuff we're even doing now will be irrelevant and they might be changing. But look, I can truly speak that I've never ever felt pressured to play through a head knock or anything like that. I feel like we're very well looked after here in New Zealand, particularly. I think even hearing stories from guys in other parts of the world, like New Zealand is leading the way in player welfare. You even see that with guys getting rested and taking precautions, and so but we can only learn from the past, and I think we're in a pretty good place, but no doubt we'll keep learning and keep looking after our players.
I just thought I'd ask you something a little bit less rugby specific. 2020 as a whole, what was sort of the best thing in 2020 that happened for you? What was the worst thing in 2020 for you? And I guess, what are you looking forward to in 2021?
Look, mate, lifting that Bledisloe Cup up in Sydney was pretty sweet. I think you could even see my sort of raw emotion just came out. That was certainly a highlight, particularly after, the third test, to have 2 back-to-back quality performances, such a special trophy from around the pump. That was pretty sweet. The worst thing, I think the worst thing, like as a whole, not just for me personally, has been COVID and the effect that it's had on the country and the world, and people being made redundant and in pretty tough spots. And I think certainly remember during the lockdown about hearing all these people being made redundant and their lives changing, and that was not feeling like you can't help, but also feeling like lucky that it wasn't affecting us too much, but a little bit guilty, if that makes sense, in another sense, that it didn't really affect us. That was a pretty shitty feeling.
And next year, what are you looking forward to?
I'm looking forward to summer big time, just to start with. And then the Chiefs, we've got the bye the first week, so I think the coach has offered me an extra a week away, which could be nice in the long run. And off field, another year married, another year in our new house, just enjoying life.
The All Blacks captain Sam Cane speaking to Joe Porter. We've all dropped our phones, but have you ever dropped it from a plane? One man in Rio de Janeiro did, and not only did it survive, it captured its swift fall to the ground. CNN's Jeannie Moose has more.
Brazilian documentary maker Ernesto Galeotto wanted to use his phone, not lose it, as he shot the beaches of Rio de Janeiro. But when he took one hand off, the phone took off. Ernesto got a little annoyed. Here's how it looked from the phone's point of view. A blurry, spinning 19 seconds later, the iPhone 6 landed amid the beach grass. The next day, Ernesto used the Find My Phone app and actually found it. You'd say thank you too if your phone fell out of a plane and still worked with only minor damage to the screen protector and case. Jealous Twitter users complained, I could just look at my screen and it cracks, but I dropped mine into a urinal and it dies.
Made a little mistake while
Jimmy Fallon showcased the survival story.
The iPhone 6 slipped out of his hand.
That's crazy. I mean, who the hell still has an iPhone 6?
This isn't the first iPhone to weather a fall from a plane. A photographer in Iceland was shooting flooding when he dropped his cell back in 2018. When it landed, 7 seconds later, you could hear the plane's engine receding. It took 13 months for hikers to stumble on the phone. It still worked to go online, send photos, make calls, though the person on the other end couldn't hear him. No such problem for Ernesto. It's here and it may even have messages, he said. It turns out you can take aim and shoot an iPhone, but drop it from a plane and it's still not shot. Ernesto won't have to ask Santa for a new one, but Santa should hold tight onto his while aloft in his sleigh.
The wonderful Jenny Moose there. This is Owen out for 2020. See you on the other side, 2021. The wonderful Checkpoint team will be with you, same place, same time next week.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The United Nations is to help Fiji in the aftermath of Cyclone Yasa, which has left 2 people dead and thousands more homeless. A woman has appeared in court in Auckland on charges relating to threats targeting graduation ceremonies at Otago University. Employees at Ports of Auckland have boycotted work today after what they call disrespectful comments by the port's CEO on checkpoint. A man has been charged over owning a dog that fatally mauled a newborn baby in Hamilton in October. The government has extended the time limit on overseas licences for foreigners stuck here due to border closures. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Tonight on Night's Good Shirter, our Friday Night Live act, in a radio-only broadcast of the band's 2002 Helen Young studio recording. We've got a mixtape made up of the best of the year's mixtapes. Country Life calls it a wrap on 2020, and because it's something we often want to dive into at this time of year, or maybe we just need to rehydrate, we have a Sonic Tonic dedicated to water on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National. Thank you, me, and this is me talking about what's coming up on, well, I've already told you just then, but what I'm going to ask you to consider now is our 7:07pm question for tonight's Sonic Tonic. So this is your sneak preview. Where do you go to cool off on a hot summer's day? Is it your favourite beach, your favourite